Hey everyone, Mr. Voppel here. I'm coming to you from an undisclosed location that is not my living room. Wherever you are, I hope that you and your loved ones are safe and coronavirus free. Keep washing those hands. But anyway, welcome to your basic training. In this lesson, I'm going to show you the ropes. I'm going to show you how to do problems with forces, equilibrium, net force, free body diagrams. We'll get to all of that. But I want you to prove that you have what it takes to handle any sort of problem I could throw at you. Now, before we get started, there's a couple things you're going to need. Ready? Two things. One, you're going to need a copy of your facts related to forces and free body diagrams. So go ahead and print that out or get an extra screen with that pulled up so you can use that at any time. Second, you're going to need your notebook, a place where you're going to do these problems so you can show me that you have what it takes. So go ahead and pause the video and I'll see you in a minute. Welcome back. Thank you for going to get those. Well, let's talk about forces. We know a force is any push or pull on an object. So let's look at this coffee mug. I can push the coffee mug by applying a force to it. I can pull the coffee mug, and that's a force that's applied to it. There are forces applied on objects all around us. Any push or pull on an object is a force. Now, how can we measure force on this coffee mug? How can I know how much force I'm pushing on it with or I'm pulling on it with? Well, good news is I've got a great device right here that helps us measure force. This is called a spring scale. So this spring scale allows us to see how much force we're pulling with based on how far this spring stretches. Right here, if I pull down, it stretches and it tells me how much force. So I want you to tell me how much force am I pulling with on this coffee mug? Oh, you can't read it. Sorry, it's too far away. Let me get a little closer. Okay, so go ahead. You'll see here's the spring scale. You see that? So you can see, sorry. No. Oh, wait, here it is. That's it. Okay, so the spring scale has two sides. One is grams, which is mass. That's not what we care about. Newtons, which is force. So however hard I pull on this spring, it tells me how many newtons of force I'm applying. So let's take this coffee mug, and I want you to read our spring scale and tell me how many newtons of force I'm pulling on it with. How many? 8 newtons. There you go, right there. It's going a little back and forth. And notice the harder I pull, the higher the reading. Oh my gosh. Yeah, pretty swole here. 20 newtons. Oh, look, a little wimpy force. Just 1 newton right there. There you go. So that's how a spring scale works, and it tells me how much force I'm applying to an object. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to figure out how can we identify the forces that are acting on an object. Here we go. Time to draw your first free body diagram. Well, to draw a free body diagram, first we need an object to look at. Don't you just love a good cup of coffee? Don't worry, that's not real. Okay, so here's our coffee mug. This is our object. And what I want you to do is I want you, here it is, sitting on the table, I want you to draw a free body diagram of this coffee mug. Ready? Here we go. So I want you to follow along with me and do this in your notebook. This is what you're going to be turning in. Well, here's our coffee mug sitting on the table just like we left it. And to start drawing our free body diagram of the coffee mug, we're going to start with a box. We're going to use this to represent our coffee mug. When we draw free body diagrams, we usually use a box like this
to represent a more complex object. So now the next thing that we need to do is we need to identify all the forces that are acting on the coffee mug. Now, as a reminder, how we write forces on a free body diagram is we need to state what is the object applying the force and what is the object receiving the force. So we write them like this: force of one object on another object. Force of blank on blank. So what I want you to do is I want you to pause the video and see if you can name all the forces you can possibly think of acting on this coffee mug before I do. Ready? Go. So hopefully now you've got a good list going. Let's see if you're able to figure out some of what these are. So the first force we might notice is that this coffee mug is not floating in midair. No, it is sitting on the table. And if the table wasn't there, what would happen? Well, it would fall down. And so the reason it doesn't fall down is that the table is pushing it up. So there's a force, a push on the coffee mug from the table upward. So let's go ahead and let's put that on our free body diagram. You can see on our facts that we start with an arrow from the center of the object and we move it pointing in the direction that the force acts. The table pushes the coffee mug upward. Let's label this arrow. I'm going to call it FT, meaning force of table. And then over to the side, our list, we're going to start naming this force. So FT, and then tell me what it is. Remember, we write them like this: force of table. On mug. We write them as force of blank on blank. So that's one of them. Now the question is, what other forces are acting on our mug? So maybe you thought, well, what about the ground? Is the ground doing anything to the mug? No, the ground is not touching the mug beneath the table, the carpet down there. So that's not a force. Neither is the wall or the couch. Those aren't touching the mug or applying a push or pull to it in any way. So those aren't forces that are acting on the mug. And maybe you think, well, hey, what about friction? I've heard of that before. Is there any friction? Well, friction is a force from a surface that opposes motion along the surface. And because the mug is not trying to move left or right on the surface and nothing is pushing on it left or right, there's no friction from the table, so that's not a force. Okay, so what other force could there be? Well, we said that if there wasn't a table, what would happen to the mug? It would fall. Why would it fall? Because gravity's pulling on it. Well, we need to write it as a force of an object on the mug. What object is pulling on the mug, causing that gravity? The earth. The earth is pulling down on the mug. We call that gravity. So we can put that on our free body diagram. Here we go. The force of the earth pulling on the mug. That's what gravity is. It's just a pull of a planet. So let's write it out to the side here. Force of, and I want you to fill in this blank, on the mug. What force of what object? What goes in this blank right here? It is not gravity. It is the earth. Why? Because it has to be an object. So we say what object is causing the gravity, the pull. It's the earth. So the force of the earth on the mug. Great. So we've got two forces. What other forces are there? Maybe you've got one. What about air resistance or air? Is there any force of air pushing on it? Well, there is lots of air molecules, if you look at this mug here, surrounding it, but they push on it in all directions equally, and it's so small that we don't care about it. It's not significant. So no, force of air on the mug is not correct. Well, what else? What can there be? Why don't you pause and think about it? See if you can name any more. You say, well, hey, wait a second. I know that the table is pushing up on the mug. Well, isn't the mug also pushing down on the table? So what about that? The force of the mug on the table. Well, hold on a second. What are we drawing? We're drawing a free body diagram of the mug. So all of our forces should be on the mug, not on the table. So the force of the mug on the table is not a force that we would include in this free body diagram. Okay, so what else could there be? What other forces are there? There are no other forces? That's right, there are no more forces. It's just as important to know when to stop drawing forces as it is to know when to start drawing forces. So our free body diagram is done. You did it. Complete. Congrats. Your first free body diagram. So way to go. That's the end of your basic training on drawing free body diagrams. Now let's see if you can tackle a tougher challenge.